The Letter, the Witch, and the Ring by John Bellairs, Chapter 8. Rosarita knelt there on the floor looking up at Gert Bigger's angry face. In her trembling hands, she still held the piece of paper with the strange drawing on it. Gert Biggers stepped into the little room and pulled the curtain shut behind her. "I asked you, miss, what you think you're doing. There's a law against trespassing, you know, and there are reform schools for girls who steal things. Would you like your parents to know what you've been up to? Eh? Would you?" Rosarita opened her mouth to speak, but all that came out was, please, I didn't mean... Gert Bigger took a step forward. She reached down and snatched the paper from Rosarita's numb fingers. Silence fell while Gert Bigger stood there looking from the paper to Rosarita and back to the paper again. She seemed to be trying to make up her mind. At that moment, a bell on the front door of the store jangled and a voice yelled, "Yoo-hoo, Gertie, are you home?" Gert Bigger turned and swore under her breath. Rosarita jumped up and ducked out through the narrow curtained opening. She sprinted down the main aisle of the store, right past the surprised-faced middle-aged woman with a shopping bag in her hand. Slam went the door behind her. Rosarita clattered down the steps and dashed across the road. She ran blindly, and she could hear herself crying as she ran. She cut across the corner of the cornfield, trampling the wrinkly green plants underfoot. Her feet found a pathway of green grass that ran along the edge of the cornfield and up over the top of a low hill. Rosarita ran up it, ran as hard as she could until she collapsed under a droopy elm tree that grew near a flat-topped boulder. She threw herself down on the grass, tore off her glasses, and cried. Rosarita lay there crying for a long time. She was tired and hungry and frightened and alone. She hadn't had any food at all since last night, and she had gotten almost no sleep. At first, she was afraid that Gert Bigger would come after her. At any moment, her hand would be on Rosarita's shoulder. But Gert Bigger never came. Rosarita went on crying, but she could feel her body starting to relax. She didn't care about anything now, anything at all. It was a delicious feeling. Slowly, her mind started to drift off. It was so nice lying here in the shade. So very, very nice. But it would be even nicer at home. Home. In. Rosarita's eyes closed. A soft breeze rustled through the corn, and in the distance a fly was lazily buzzing. Rosarita shook her head, fighting weakly against the drowsiness that was falling over her. She was trying to think of something. What was it? She never found out, because in a very few minutes she was fast asleep. "Hey, you, wake up! You better wake up! Don't you know it's bad to sleep on the wet ground? You might catch cold. Come on, wake up!" Rosarita awoke to hear this worried, insistent voice speaking to her. She shook her head and looked up. All she saw was a blur. Then she remembered her glasses. After fumbling a bit in the grass near her, she located them and put them on. When she looked up, Rosarita saw a girl about her own age. She was wearing a short-sleeved plaid shirt and jeans and muddy army boots. The girl had straight dishwater blonde hair, and it was combed down on both sides of her head. Her face was longish, and it had a sad, worried expression. The dark eyebrows curved up into worry lines. Rosarita thought that she had seen this face somewhere before, but where? When she remembered, she almost laughed. The girl looked just like the Jack of Clubs. "Hi there," said the girl. "Gee, I'm glad you woke up. Didn't anybody ever tell you it was bad to sleep on the ground when it's wet? It rained last night, you know." "Yeah, I know," said Rosarita. She got up and put out her hand. "I'm Rosarita Pottinger. What's your name?" "Agatha Sipes. They call me Aggie for short. I live up that way over the hill. This is my father's farm, by the way. Are you the one that stomped all over those corn plants back there?" Rosarita nodded sadly. "Yeah, that was me. I'm sorry, but I was crying so hard I didn't look where I was going." The girl looked worried. "You oughtn't do that kind of thing. Farmers work hard for a living," she added in a less severe tone. "Why were you crying?" Rosarita opened her mouth, but then she hesitated. She wanted to tell her troubles to someone, but she wanted to be believed. "My friend, Mrs. Zimmerman, is lost, and I don't know where to find her. We were staying at a farm down the road last night, and she ran out the front door and just disappeared." The girl rubbed her chin and looked wise. "Oh, I bet I know what happened. She probably went walking in the woods and got lost. It happens to lots of people up here in the summertime. Let's go up to my place and we'll call the sheriff's department and they'll send out some people to look for her. They'll find her all right." Rosarita thought of the circle of trampled grass in front of the farmhouse. The circle with no path leading away. It was no use. She'd just have to tell the truth and risk the consequences. Do you believe in magic? She asked. She said suddenly. The girl looked startled. Huh? I said, do you believe in magic? You mean ghosts and witches and magic spells and stuff like that? Yeah. Agatha grinned shyly. Yeah, I do. I know you're not supposed to, but I can't help it, she added in a worried voice. Sometimes I think there's a ghost in the cellar in our house, but Mom says it's just the wind at night. You don't think there's a ghost in our cellar, do you? How would I know? Said Rosarita in an irritated voice. Hey, do you want to hear what happened to Mrs. Zimmerman, or don't you? Sure, I want to hear. I really do. Tell me all about it. Rosarita and Agatha Sipes sat down on the grass under the elm tree. Rosarita's stomach growled, and she remembered that she hadn't eaten since last night. She was terribly hungry, but she wanted to tell her story, and Agatha seemed eager to listen. Rosarita began. She told the whole story as far as she knew it, from Ole's mysterious letter to the empty ring box on through the very strange things that had been happening to her and Mrs. Zimmerman lately. When she got to the part about Mrs. Zimmerman's disappearance, Agatha's eyes grew wide, and when she described her run-in with Mrs. Bigger, Agatha's eyes got even wider, and her mouth dropped open. She glanced nervously in the direction of Gert Bigger's store. My gosh, she said, it's a wonder she didn't kill you, and you know what? I bet she's the one who made your friend disappear. Rosarita looked strangely at Agatha. Do you know anything about her? Mrs. Bigger, I mean? I sure do. She's a witch. Now it was Rosarita's turn to be flabbergasted. Huh? How do you know? How do I know? Because last year I worked in the Ellis Corners library, and she came in and took out every last book about magic that we had. That's how I know. Some of them were in the reference room, and she couldn't take them out, so she just sat there for hours and read. I asked Mrs. Byer, the librarian, about her, and she said Mrs. Bigger had been doing that for years. She said she had library cards for all the libraries around here and took out all the magic books she could find. Mrs. Breyer says she likes to read the covers off them and never takes them back till the library starts hounding her. Isn't that weird? Yeah, it sure is. Rosarita felt strange. She was wildly elated because her hunch had been proved right. At least, she felt that it had been proved right, but at the same time, she felt helpless and scared. If Mrs. Bigger really was a witch, what could she and Aggie do about it? Rosarita got up and paced around. Then she sat down on the flat-topped boulder and lapsed into deep thought. Aggie stood near her, looking uncomfortable. She shifted nervously from one foot to the other and puckered up her eyebrows into the most worried frown she had produced yet. Did I say something wrong, Rosarita? She asked after several silent minutes had passed. If I did, I'm sorry. I really am. Rosarita shook herself out of her trance and looked up. No, Aggie, you didn't say anything wrong. Honest, you didn't. But I just don't know what to do. If you're right, and old Mrs. Bigger is a witch, and she has done something to Mrs. Zimmerman, well, what can we do? Just the two of us, I mean. I don't know. Neither do I. More silence. Silence for a good 5 minutes. Then Aggie spoke up again. Hey, I know what let's do. Let's go home to my house and have some lunch. My mom always fixes a lot of food because we have a really big family, and I'm sure there'd be enough for you. Come on. After lunch, maybe we can figure out what to do. You can't think good on an empty stomach. That's what my dad says anyway. Rosarita looked reluctant, but she really didn't have any better ideas. On the way to the farmhouse, Aggie talked to Blue Streak. She talked about things that she was worried about, like rabies and tetanus and electrical shock and mayonnaise that has been left out of the icebox too long. Rosarita, however, was only half listening. She was thinking, trying to make up her mind what to do. Should she give up playing Nancy Drew Girl Detective and call her folks and have them come and get her? No. Rosarita was a stubborn girl, and she still thought she might be able to find Mrs. Zimmerman without the aid of her parents. What Aggie had told her about Mrs. Bigger and the magic books had made her more certain than ever that Mrs. Zimmerman had been carried off by witchcraft of some kind. So Rosarita went back to her idea of calling Jonathan. She would do that as soon as she got to Aggie's house. With her mind racing along in high gear, Rosarita tried to figure out what her next move would be. What should she say to Mrs. Sipes about what had happened? They were within sight of the farmhouse when Rosarita reached out and grabbed Aggie's arm. Wait a minute, Aggie. Why, what's the matter? We have to think up a story to tell your mother. I can't tell her what I told you. She'll think I'm crazy. I can't even tell her my real name, because then she'd want to call my folks, and I don't want her to call them up. Aggie frowned. I don't think you ought to lie to my mother. It's not nice to lie. And anyway, I think you'll get caught. My mom is pretty smart. She threw it in a minute. When people disagreed with Rosarita, it usually made her mad. But in this case, she was doubly mad because she was proud of her ability to make up alibis and excuses. Making up excuses is hard, and it is not quite the same thing as telling tall stories. You have to be able to come up with a story that people will believe, and Rosarita could really do that most of the time. Rosarita threw an irritated glance at Aggie. Your mom isn't the smartest person in the world, I bet. And anyway, I'm good at making things up. All we have to do is sit down and figure out a story. Then we both memorize it so there won't be any slip-ups. Now it was Aggie's turn to be crabby. Oh yeah? What are you going to tell her? What are we going to tell her? Here's my new friend, Rosarita, who just fell out of a flying saucer. No, dope. We don't tell her anything like that. We tell her something she'll think is true. Then we call Uncle Jonathan and get him to tell us what kind of spell to say to make Mrs. Bigger tell us what she did with Mrs. Zimmerman, okay? Aggie bit her lip and wrinkled up her forehead. She took a deep breath and let it out. Oh, all right. But if we get caught, I'm going to say it's all your fault. I'm not going to get bawled out just because you think it's nice to lie to people. Rosarita gritted her teeth. I don't think it's nice to lie, but we have to, that's all. Now come on, this is what we'll say. A bell began to ring, a little sharp, clangy handbell for calling people in for lunch at the Sipes farmhouse. Aggie started forward, but Rosarita grabbed her arm and dragged her over. Behind a forcynthia bush, she put her lips to Aggie's ear and started to whisper. And that's the end of chapter 8.